As a music producer, I would say you should always challenge yourself to make the same sounds as other producers. How often do you listen to a track that you are working on? I'm trying to get my head around mixdown and mastering. I equally love and hate this question. I'm deeply struggling with Spotify. I've lost count of how many angry, bitter DJ producers I have seen this week. If you're wanting a track to sound a bit louder without actually being louder, the only advice I can really ever give is Hey guys, welcome to the Kane audio vlog. It is Friday. It's time for another Ask Me Anything. Usual rules apply. Comment anything you want below this video and I'll get back to you in next week's video. Before I look at last week's video, is there any house admin? First of all, yes, apologies. It's not so loud right now, I don't think, so you might, I guess headphones users probably can hear a bit of background noise. There is some building work going on down the road and it's been on and off for for this week really, and it's been all quiet today until now when I decided, you know what, screw it, I'm going to do my AMA, and and it's just started up, so apologies for that, although it doesn't seem as loud right now as it was 5 minutes ago, so it may get worse and I apologize in advance. Second to that, the Spotify playlist 5302 Electronica has just been updated this very second of me recording the video. It's now Thursday, almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah, go check it out. There's some awesome new music as usual. Look, I mean, sounds silly, doesn't it, me saying there's some awesome new music on there? Of course there's awesome new music. I wouldn't have put it on there if I didn't think it was awesome. But we've got tracks from Max Cooper, Gidge, Bicep, Ash, more Max Cooper in a collab, Rival Consoles, Kolsch or Kulsch, Rain, Christian Loeffler, you name it, NTO, Niels Fram, huge names in there if you're into your electronica. It's the playlist to follow. There'll be a link below this video, check it out. There's also, in fact, did I change it? I meant to change it. Hopefully by the time this video goes out and you click this link, it'll take you to my profile where you will see not only 5302 Electronica, you will also see 5302 Archive, which is the whole thing. So yeah, give that playlist a follow as well if you want, because you can just stick that one on shuffle or random or whatever, and I think there's like 20 something hours of music on there. Yeah, there we go. That is it, my friends. Yeah, what have I been doing this week? Do you know what, it's don't know. Honestly, I feel like a teenager, you know, when your mum would go, what did you have for lunch today? And you're like, oh, I don't know. That is now my life. I'm just an old man. So yeah, the only thing of note is I feel like I'm I'm probably speaking too soon, but it did occur to me earlier on. For those of you long-term followers of this channel, will know that I built this cabin in the garden this summer during lockdown, and I noticed it's currently 19.3 degrees in here, centigrade that is, which is perfectly comfortable, but I have gone in and out of the house a couple of times today, and each time I've gone I'm blowing out steam outside. I think it's about 3 degrees Celsius outside, so yeah, it is very cold outside, but this cabin so far is holding up. So yeah, so I was thinking I might at some point do a follow-up video on building the studio, and do like a bit of an update on how things are going well, 6 months later, I guess. But actually, I think I want to see through winter first, because British winters are an odd one at best. We could have one day it would be maybe 15 degrees Celsius, and the next day could be -2, -3. So it's always an odd one. So I kind of want to experience the best and the worst of the winter before I do a full update on this cabin. I'm just talking for the sake of talking now. Let's get on and have a look at last week's questions. So where are we? That was Ask Me Anything 132. Let me readjust my mic. Is that right? 132. Yeah, so this must be 133. Right, starting at the top. Castronaut Music. Comparison is the thief of joy. Yes, I guess so. I think this is in line with, I did see another comment, it may have been Castronaut as well. Yes, I can see, so I'll go to your other comment now. As a music producer, I would say you should always challenge yourself to make the same sounds as other producers. So this is following on from a conversation I had last week. Monologue I had last week. It definitely makes you a better producer. Always look at it as a challenge/competition, but don't beat yourself up for not sounding as good. Producing should always be fun, otherwise try again tomorrow. 100% I agree. And I don't know whether I actually said these words last week, but definitely my intentions were, by all means, copy other producers as a learning process. You know, I know I talked about Skrillex because Skrillex was just an insane phase of the music industry, or electronic music industry, where every budding producer wanted to be able to sound like Skrillex. So I use that as the sort of key example. But like I say, you know, it's one thing to learn how to make Skrillex bass lines. It's an entirely different thing to be able to be better or different, or take a different spin on Skrillex bass lines. And that's kind of the point I think I was trying to make, was that, you know, by all means copy other producers just as a learning process in how the hell did they make that sound. But once you've learned to make that sound, or as near as you can get, then you need to move on and do something different, wildly different preferably. But yeah, there we go. Moving on, Capital Sin. Thank you again, Dom. Always top-notch answers. Here is my questions, 2 in 1 for the next video. How often do you listen to a track that you are working on? Yeah, tricky. Do you know what? I'm not... I've always said this. My favourite productions that I've ever done were start to finish, like 4 hours. Honestly, they just fall out of your brain and they just become tracks. And those are always the ones where I'm like, oh, do you know what? I love this track. I'm really proud of this track, or whatever. But I always have to be very, very clear. Those are so rare. those are the moments I live for. But they're just so rare. You know, if I put it into terms of my latest big project being my album, available now, there'll be a link below. I guess of the 10 tracks that made it to my album, I think one of those tracks was kind of an instant, like, oh yeah, I know exactly where I'm going with this. It's called Don't Press That, if you're interested, and I think that's probably one of my favourites on the album, along with maybe Frozen Mist, which was another one where I just kind of threw some sounds together and went, oh, I know exactly where this is going, and it worked. So outside of those, how often do I listen to a track? Because obviously with those, I listen to them for the 4 hours that I'm working on them, or, you know, and then I might listen to them after they're released or whatever, but I don't tend to go back to them because I've finished it. As for other tracks can take weeks, if not months, to finish. And I've kind of learnt to I've kind of created a workflow that works for that now. So I'll always kind of have maybe 20 or 30 tracks on the go. And of those 20 or 30, probably only 2 or 3 will ever really truly get finished as a piece of music under my own name. But the other 20 plus will either kind of just sit on a hard drive waiting to be used for maybe a different project at a later date, because it might have had a really nice chord progression, or it might have had a really cool bass sound, or it might have had an amazing drum sound that I thought, I love this drum sound, but the rest of the track just isn't working, so I'll just, bank it for now. Those tracks I come back to, I listen to every now and then, maybe once every week, once every couple of weeks, once a month maybe, and honestly it can go for 2 years. I've had tracks on my hard drive sit there doing nothing, collecting dust for 3, 4, 5 or 6 years even, and then one day someone has mentioned something that has made me go, "Ooh, I know," and I'll just dig this old half done production out, and I'll just be like, "Oh, this arpeggiator is what I was looking for," or this whatever. There's a sound in there somewhere that's made me go, "I know, I made one of those before." And then you sort of rework it or take it in a direction or whatever. When you take a break, do you jump onto a new idea or no music at all during that break? Both, I guess, in kind of what I've just said. So I've always got a fair few. So there's always one in focus. Like at the minute, I'm working on a project named, was it Ridden, I think. And that's been going on for about 3 weeks, on and off, as in, again, it's tricky because while I'm sat here in this studio pretty much every day, I'm not always working on my own music, and I'm quite often doing, engineering or sound design or other jobs. So it's not like I'm sat here in front of Bitwig 24/7, but I probably try and spend a whole day per week, split up, but essentially it totals up to probably 1 day a week where I'm working on just purely self-indulgent stuff for myself. So I've had one of those going on for about 3 weeks, and in all honesty, total work time has probably been a day in total. But there have been other tracks that I've worked on for other projects, and I know that there are a couple that are for my own personal use. But I kind of just focus on one as much as I can, but will probably use one or two others as a distraction from the one I'm supposed to be working on. So I think it's always good. It's kind of a weird way of working, but I always procrastinate and I get sidetracked, and so I've kind of learnt to basically, if I work on 2 or 3 projects at the same time, I can always use one to get sidetracked into, and then when I should be doing the other project, and then that'll climb up the list. And so I'm kind of juggling priorities and tricking myself into working basically. But there are times where, I know I've discussed it on this channel before, where I know there are definitely times where I just feel completely uninspired. That could be for a multitude of reasons. I think, to be honest, I don't admit it enough, but sometimes it's for mental health reasons, and I don't want anyone to think anything silly about that. But there are times where it's not like I don't suffer from depression, and to be quite frank, if I did, then I wouldn't be afraid to admit that. But it's not depression. It's just sometimes I just don't feel creative. I just don't feel inspired. I'm just not feeling it. It's not like I feel sad or angry or upset or just not feeling whatever music I'm working on or something. So those sorts of times, those are the times where I need to basically take a break from music altogether. And as I've said before, I'll watch a sci-fi film or something like that. I'll do something that that I know is, I want to say, do you know what? Watching a sci-fi film, I guess you can class that as productive for me, really, which is kind of weird. But honestly, I think, doing something like that for me, it tends to just inspire me. And, moving from my hearing senses to my seeing senses can quite often, one will inspire the other. So just having just beautiful visuals in front of me can sometimes inspire me to make music. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Moving on, John Bloomfield. Hey Dom, another question for you. I'm trying to get my head around mixdown and mastering. I exported my stems from Bitwig and imported them into Mixbus. Did a mixdown with some EQing and gain staging along the way. I have read that Spotify likes the tracks to be around -14 LUFS, so I have aimed for that on the master channel and ended up just under with a true peak of around -1.2 dB. However, when exporting the file as a WAV file and then playing it against a reference track, it still seems quiet. Any tips on where I could be going wrong? So this is a tricky one. I equally love and hate this question. I love it because I feel like the answer is important, but I hate it because the answer is really complicated and I have to use terms like subjective. So I guess that, this is where mixing and mastering becomes kind of a dark art. Which it shouldn't be. Mixing and mastering in and of itself is not a dark art. It should be a very strictly scientific thing, but it kind of isn't because it's kind of subjective. And by that I mean, if you make a track, I guess what you have to understand is some people want their music to sound over compressed. Some people want their music to have huge dynamic range and just be free flowing completely. Some people want their music to be quiet, and this is where maybe the mastering side loses the science and becomes a bit of a dark art. And I guess you need to, as a producer, mix engineer, mastering engineer, whatever it is, you need to put that hat on and go, as a writer, producer, I guess, how do I want it to sound in the end? Because there are a few people that will push it to maybe -10 LUFS and put it on Spotify, and they're okay with Spotify bringing your track down a few dB to reference match everything. There are some people who couldn't give two hoots and will just push it and slam it to, I don't know, -3 LUFS or something, so it's just a big square wave, and in which case it will probably sound terrible on Spotify or YouTube or Apple Music or all of these things that have these auto gain controls built in now. So I guess there's that to bear in mind. However, on the flip side, and this is an almost equally important but really shouldn't be and hopefully one day won't be issue, that for us that DJ, we don't have auto gain control, and there is a distinct difference when you play a record in a nightclub. If you are mixing from one that is, say, -7 LUFS into another record that is -14 LUFS, there is a distinct difference in the way the nightclub sound system handles it, because our ears have natural built-in compressors, and when things are so loud, everything gets compressed naturally through our eardrums, and sometimes you can kind of lose the vibe or energy if you don't get your gains right and whatever as the DJ. So there is that kind of slight caveat, but I'm kind of hesitant to go in any depth about it because it shouldn't be an issue, and I wish it wasn't an issue, but I think it kind of is one that maybe we all need to just ignore a bit to an extent. The fact is if everyone in the world aimed for -14 LUFS, then everything would be a nice reference point, and we could just, as DJs, just mix from one record to the other without thinking about that loudness. And similarly, everyone on the radio could just play a record and not worry about gain staging or anything like that. So that's where it kind of gets tricky. Also, with electronic music, it is naturally going to be a little bit less dynamic than something like an acoustic piano or a violin or a harp, or any acoustic instrument really, because those are instruments that you can play loud and quiet. Whereas electronic instruments, a kick drum will hit 0 dB every single time. So I guess what I'm trying to do is answer your question by not answering your question, by pointing out that actually it kind of doesn't matter. And I guess it depends on, you need to think about where your end goal is. So if you are making a nightclub hit, then I guess you want DJs to be playing it, so maybe push it a little bit harder. If you are making, some electronica that's unlikely to ever see a nightclub, then maybe dial it back a bit. So it's kind of somewhere in between, and it gets to a point, I think, when we're dealing with LUFS, it kind of gets to a point where if you're in the approximate ballpark, you just need to do that final switch off your monitor, as in your screen monitor, not your computer, not your speaker monitors. Switch off your screen, turn your back to it, crank it up, and just not too loud because you don't want your natural compressors to kick in, but basically just listen to it and go, do I like it? Am I happy with it? If you're happy with it, that's great. That's all you need. I think we're kind of entering an age where outside of the obvious mastering frequencies, when it comes to purely just straight up loudness, I think we're reaching an era where loudness kind of doesn't really matter, and it's kind of up to the end user. And have you ever seen in the last 10 years a hi-fi system or a car stereo or a DJ mixer or any listening device, any listening device that doesn't have a volume button? If you want it louder, turn it up. So yeah, it's kind of a weird one. So as for tips on where you could be going wrong, I don't think you are going wrong. If you're hitting a true peak of -1 dB, that's actually kind of a good area. You kind of want at least half a dB. You want it at least minus 0.5 dB true peak, really, because when you upload to SoundCloud, for example, it'll get processed. And I know SoundCloud has horrible, inter-sample clipping, which means that when it gets crushed into an MP3, it's almost a dB louder then, and it can saturate pretty quickly and go into the red, and it gets a bit ugly. So actually having that dB of headroom is absolutely fine. And I think, the only thing, if you're wanting a track to sound a bit louder without actually being louder, the only advice I can really ever give is sculpting out EQ. Get rid of what shouldn't be there. And by that I mean applying things like a high pass filter onto your master, and maybe scooping out everything under 40 hertz at least 40 hertz, because let's face it, even my Opals, I don't think they'll really reproduce much below 40 hertz without farting their way out. You'll be hard pressed to find a speaker or headphone that can reproduce below 40 hertz comfortably. And if it can reproduce 40 hertz and below, then at what cost is the question, because it's probably really struggling and using up a lot of energy to do that, and the compensation, the on the flip side of that is that you're probably losing some high or mid or whatever somewhere else. So, again, depending on where the fundamental frequency of your track is, you might want to scoot below 60 hertz, 70 hertz even, again, depending on what key you're in and whatever. So yes, there are things like that to consider. Also, look around the sort of 300 hertz area. That's often like a bit of a muddy area, but it actually drains, it saps energy from your speakers. So you might find that a track is actually quite muddy around the 300 hertz area, and there's you might not have a feature instrument. Generally, we don't have a feature instrument around 300 hertz. Your sort of mid-low synths are probably closer to 500 hertz, and then your actual bass lines and your kick drums and whatever are much closer to 100. So in between there's that 300 crossover where nothing really happens, and it's definitely not sub bass, but it's not really in the melody range either. So sometimes just scooping out, maybe like setting an EQ to be, I don't know, maybe -3 dB at 300 hertz. Again, depending on the track, you could be -5, 6 dB, and scooping out loads, and it could make that much of a difference that actually it's freeing up a lot of dynamic headroom for you to push everything else a bit more. So yeah, sometimes it's what's not there is more important than what is there. Hopefully that helps. I see you've put another question here. Hey Dom, what do you think is the best way to go about distributing my own music without the need for any labels, etc.? I have read up about TuneCore and DistroKid, but is it still better to try and get music out on labels, or just set up my own label to just distribute my own music? I think that's a good and important question. I think record labels still have a really important part to play in this world as it is, and looking ahead to the future. But I think you need to ask yourself, what can this insert label name here do for me? Because if the record label is only a very small record label and is maybe just run by a small group of people, or just one person or whatever, you need to be asking yourself, well, what kind of demographic is it hitting? Is it gonna put you in front of a new audience? And if so, how's that going to change things? And is that audience right for you? And that's kind of the job of a record label now. So I think, for me personally, from my experience, there are record labels that I had released music on for many years, to a point where each new release I was putting out wasn't really gaining any momentum. It wasn't really, it wasn't doing that much, and a lot of that came down to the fact that everybody who followed that record label on social media and whatever already followed me and whatever anyway, so it wasn't that label wasn't really giving me much of a platform, and that wasn't the label's fault. It's just that they didn't really have much more to offer me that I couldn't have done myself. So under that scenario, yeah, self-release by all means. However, when I signed to Mousetrap, for example, it's obviously a much bigger audience. They've got crazy numbers of followers on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and whatever else. So that gave me a much bigger platform, and in fact I would imagine the majority of people watching this video right now have heard of me through Mousetrap and through my releases on Mousetrap. So I think a record label is still a really important thing for that reason. Not only that, I think also if the record label is a brand within its own right, that can have a huge impact. I can see my camera's about to run out of time, so I'm just going to hit reset. Yeah, so I think record labels can play a really important part in the music industry and our career. And I think, if I look at Mousetrap as a prime example, Mousetrap kind of started off as just Deadmau5's outlet, really. And then you got people like Chris Lake and the likes, and Feed Me signed, and Skrillex and whatever. And I guess Mousetrap itself kind of just developed its own sound as a label, as a brand. And I think Mousetrap has spent the last 10 years really kind of just going its own direction, which is very similar to Deadmau5, admittedly. But I think Deadmau5 and Mousetrap are two different brands, and whilst there's a massive overlap, I think it's fair to say that almost 100% of Mousetrap fans are a fan of Deadmau5, but I would not say that is the other way around. However, there is a huge number of Deadmau5 fans who are also a fan of Mousetrap, which allows them to then go, oh shit, there's all these other artists that, so people who are maybe just introduced to electronic music through the likes of superstars like Deadmau5, that's one hell of an introduction into dance music. So to then discover Mousetrap and this whole list of other artists, I think, again, that's a great introductory. So in things like that, and Mousetrap itself being its own brand with its own thing going on, I think that's hugely important. So yeah, that's my kind of view on whether you should sign to labels or not. I think a label should have something to offer you, and if they don't have that thing to offer you, then by all means self-release. The final thing, and this is maybe almost more important, is that I remember writing a piece years ago, sort of going through this, and it's what I called the shit filter. Many years ago, when everything was back on vinyl and whatever, you were looking at sort of everything would cost money to make a record, to write the record. You'd have to hire a studio full of expensive gear and an engineer to operate it all for you as a producer or as a writer or whatever it was you were, and then you'd have to pitch it to a record label as a draft or whatever, and then they would hire a better studio or a different engineer or whatever to get it complete, and they'd have a budget to record that record. And it was a huge, long, bureaucratic system, but it had money and it had a budget, and it meant that an A&R manager had to take a risk on you and basically go, right, here's 10 grand, we need to see an EP or whatever, and absolute minimum, you'd be looking at maybe 10,000 copies of vinyl getting pressed. Well, that was never free. Even if you were lucky enough, like my very first record label, we had mine's gone blank, but it's a distribution deal that basically they take a much bigger cut, but they cut the vinyl for you. So you're not fronting the cash. And if you were lucky enough to get a deal like that, I can't think of the name of the deal now, but if you had a deal like that, you needed to be able to make money for the distributor. People needed to make their money back, basically. It took investment to release music. And for that simple reason, an A&R manager had to find good music that people wanted, and it had to connect. You couldn't just go, oh yeah, we'll sign that and see what happens. You couldn't do that. You had to really truly believe in it, whereas in this day and age, and so that's what I call the shit filter, basically. But in this day and age, you could really just send an MP3 to someone and they go, yeah, so it's okay, I'll release it and maybe make 2 cents. And the problem with that, the biggest problem with that, of which there are many, is that if I if I, as a record label, realised I could put out any old crap and I'd make a minimum $1 on each one, then I could sign 500 tracks and release them every week, and full of remixes, and every remix, every version of every track made $1, and maybe sometimes $10 or whatever. Then I could just sign anything and everything and just keep churning it all out there, just saturate the market, just blast it with terrible shite, basically. And I'd make plenty of money. The artists would make 50 cents or whatever, $5 max. But the label gets to make a load of money off the back of that. And that's kind of how it has been for a long time. So I'm always kind of dubious to recommend people to self-release without the experience of working with record labels. I think it's important for most producers. Sorry, I didn't silence my phone. I think it's important for most producers to have experience of working with record labels and to recognize what they can and can't do, because I think without that, you might find yourself releasing stuff that maybe isn't up to scratch. I don't know your music personally, so I'm not saying that your music isn't up to scratch. I'm just saying in general, I think it's worthwhile finding a good record label that can represent you, and one that you are able to represent proudly as well. So hopefully that helps. You're saying you've read up on TuneCore and DistroKid, but is it better to try and get the music out on labels? So first of all, I think it's always better to go with labels, and it's kind of, even though you get less royalties and you get a smaller cut, but I'd rather a smaller cut of a much bigger pie. I think self-releasing can be good if you're a great salesperson. If that's the case, then don't even bother with TuneCore and DistroKid. Don't bother with Spotify or whatever. Just do Bandcamp, whichever one gives you the biggest cut of revenue. Just sell in that one place, and you do your salesman thing and make your money. But I don't think that's probably the case. So that's kind of how I see it. So I think, I think these TuneCore and DistroKid, and I'm aware of them. I think they're called aggregates, aren't they? And I'm aware of what kind of deals, and they say, you keep 100%, but actually you're paying $20 or whatever it is to upload your track, to get it distributed. If you find yourself a distributor, then it's free to distribute. And, yes, a distributor will take a percentage of royalties, but it's all about that upfront investment. If you're not willing to invest in that in the first place, then you shouldn't really expect anything in return. I guess that's kind of where I'm heading with that. So I think I keep coming back to record labels are quite important, because they should have someone who's doing the A&R, who knows their audience, who's built up an audience, who has a demographic primed, ready to listen to that exact kind of music. And as a producer, you may not have that yourself. So there's my old man rant on that. Rod Marconi, Magic, high five. Castronaut Music, I read your comment already. And then finally, FanFan87, Saludom, Magic, high five. After being influenced by Matt Lang, that made me buy the Make Noise DPO, be happy to be the one that made me order a Mother 32. Well, congratulations on your Mother 32, and I hope you enjoy it. On the other side, I'm deeply struggling with Spotify. I finally decided to erase every single mix I have there. Every single original mix I have there, thanks to empathetic labels allowing me to do it. I keep collabs and remixes in order to not penalise my friends, colleagues and other artists. I do this because I feed Spotify more than they feed me, and their recent statement about artists and fees cuts really trigger me. I refuse to participate in their game. Question: if every streaming platform were equal in terms of market share, which one would you recommend? Same question for purchasing websites. Purchasing. For purchasing websites, right? So I think there's a couple of things to unpack there first. I did see the statements from the Spotify CEO, and I do think it's detrimental to art itself if you're releasing stuff for the sake of just putting out content. Spotify is not and should not, nor should any music platform be, a social media system. It's not about putting out content. It shouldn't ever be about that, because your music is not content. Your music is music. It's art, and it should be seen as art, and it shouldn't matter whether it takes you a week to make a track or a year to make a track. If it's a good track, it's a good track, and that's kind of the point of it. So I disagree entirely with what the CEO was saying, and if for anyone that isn't up to date on that, I can't remember his exact words, but it was along the lines of basically, we expect artists to be releasing more music if they want to make more money. So that's not really how it works, and I guess they're looking at things from a business perspective rather than an art perspective. And look, it's going to happen, and so this is where I then flip the coin and defend Spotify. No, I'm not defending Spotify, but I'm giving a different viewpoint, I suppose. But the point is that, you know, I think it's going to happen to every company that starts making serious money like that. Is they're looking at the money. That's capitalism for you, and you know, that's how capitalism works. It has to keep making more and more and more and more and more. And art is not really it doesn't really fit into the capitalist model very well. You know, it's a tricky one because it's not, you know, art is not about efficiency, whereas making money is about productivity and efficiency and numbers and increasing profits, and that just doesn't really, they kind of fight each other in that respect. So I can kind of understand why he said what he said, but I also disagree with what he said. However, you mention if every streaming platform were equal in terms of market share. If every streaming platform had equal market share, then we wouldn't be in this capitalist world. And I think that in itself, you know, before people go, oh, you've got communist agendas, I think as much as I don't like capitalism as a structure, I'm aware that that's the structure we have and that's the one we're given, and I don't think anything's going to change anytime soon. So I think that's what we have to work with. So the fact is we don't live in a world, and we probably never will live in a world, where streaming platforms have an equal market share, and that's kind of important to remember. And the reason I'm saying this is because I have already lost count of this week alone, because everyone's getting their 2020 unwrapped Spotify stats. I've lost count of how many angry, bitter DJ producers I have seen this week slagging off Spotify unwrapped stats, and even the ones that are proud of their Spotify stats, the top couple of comments are people going, oh, I bet you only got 50p for it. Well, you know what? If they got 50p for that, it's probably 50p more than they got from any other or all the other streaming platforms out there. And that's kind of the point, is if you're going to have this capitalist approach to music, then you have to apply it to everywhere. You know, you can't just change the rules because you don't like them for one thing and then you do for another. It's not how it works. So I think it would be dangerous to even consider a world where they all had equal market share, because I just don't see that ever being an option. However, if you were to ask me which one I would recommend in terms of usability and for their interface and their database, I'd say Spotify, to be honest. So if ever I was going to discover your music, it would probably be on Spotify. Now, I can say this, I am not a fan of Spotify, but it is definitely the best we've got, like by a long shot. And I say that as a producer and a consumer. As somebody who loves music, I can I can jump onto Spotify and I can go, in fact, it's right at the top of my playlist, Release Radar. Every Friday, this gets updated with new tracks released by my favourite artists. Name another platform that does that so intuitively. And I can just hit the, no, don't show me this artist again, or no, I don't like this song, or I can heart it and save it, or I can download the whole lot. I can listen to it on my Mac, I can listen to it in my car, I can listen to it on my phone. Name another streaming platform that can do any of those things. I'm sure they're out there, but are they as good? Probably not. The fact that I can create the 5302 playlist and share it with all you lovely viewers, those are the things that make Spotify what it is. And so they do have a complete monopoly. I would love for some more companies to come out the woodwork and compete with all of that. But the biggest selling point about any streaming platform right now, and MP3 download, I think the same rules apply, should always be about the ability to discover new artists and unheard music. That should be first and foremost. As a consumer, I want to discover new artists, and I've been saying this for nearly 15 years now, since MySpace. MySpace was the greatest social network out there, purely for the fact that I could go on to, I don't know, Tiesto's MySpace page, listen to some of his tracks, see his top 10 friends, and go, ooh, who's this Avicii guy? Click on his MySpace profile, listen to some of his music, and go, oh, I love this, and then move on to someone else. And I could just discover all these new artists, and I think that was hugely important in this world of just constant new information. Nobody out there does it better than Spotify right now, let alone the fact that I can personally curate a playlist and share it with either my friends or the general public, or I could privately share it with just one friend if I want. These things are hugely important to us as consumers for obvious reasons, but also to us as producers, because it means you guys watching this video managed to find me. So I think we have to be careful with the whole slagging off Spotify thing. By all means, slag them off. And I fully agree that they should be paying more pence per play. I agree with that. But right now, they are the only company out there in terms of streaming platforms that I even see on a royalty statement with any actual money. I couldn't tell you the last time I saw Apple Music with any significant money on there, whereas Spotify, I've seen real significant music money on there. So I think that's really important for us all to realise. So I get that what you're saying, and I get that you have taken your music off Spotify, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. But I do think you need to consider the fact that Spotify right now, at least, is really the only platform that people are likely to accidentally discover you on, because your music can appear on other people's playlists, and like the 5302 Electronica playlist. Some of the music from there appears from my Release Radar that has appeared from recommendations that has come from maybe other people's playlists that I've listened to. So in a weird way, you can almost have a track go viral on Spotify. And that is huge, I think. And I think the more forward-thinking companies out there that can do something like that and compete with Spotify would be fantastic. Same question for purchasing websites, as in buying MP3s. I'm guessing you're on about like Beatport and whatever. same rules apply, I think. Exactly the same rules apply. We live in a capitalist world. There will be a monopoly of MP3 purchasing. Someone's going to do it. But at the same time, I don't really buy MP3s anymore, to be honest. So I'm not entirely sure. But if I was going to, I'd begrudgingly use Beatport, I suppose. I don't particularly like the company, but they have probably the biggest option. So there we go. Did you see the new label of Ash Dark Ocean? Yes, I did. And in fact, the release Wintermute is on the 5302 Electronica playlist. So that, my friends, is it. I can see my camera's also about to run out of battery, which is why I've probably spent the last couple of minutes talking really fast. Thank you very much for making it this far into the video. It's been a long one today, she said, or he said. If you've made it this far into the video, then please comment the word positive, because Anthony Smith talks ending 2020 on a positive note. That sounds like a good video to watch. I will see you same time next week. Cheers.